So let's start with conditionals. What is a conditional? Well, it's something that happens based off a certain event. For example, if a user is a regular user, then they are allowed access to this page, and they are routed there. If a user is an admin, then they are routed to this page. So it's basically taking a certain condition, looking at that condition, and if that condition is met, then something happens. If that condition is false, then something else happens. So think about it as just, well, conditions. And in Bubble, it will look like this. We will have an only when section, and we will give an action. And then only when that action or event happens, do we run this workflow or do we run this step? So that is how conditions work. And don't worry, we're going to be getting into an example here in just a second, but I just want to introduce the concepts first. The next one is going to be state variables. Now, what is a state variable? The best example I can come up with is in sports, and we're looking at a scoreboard. Now, on the scoreboard, you see a bunch of different metrics, the time, the score, etc., and they're always changing. So think about the scoreboard having 0, 0 for each team. One team scores a point. Now that scoreboard is updated to reflect 0, 1. So that 0 now became a 1. However, it is the same text. So in our form example, we'll have it say submit, and then when a user submits, we'll say submitted. Another way to think about it is a math equation. If you have 2x plus 3 equals 17, well, we need to give x a variable, and x can always be changing. So if it doesn't make sense yet, let's just hop into Bubble and do it ourselves. That way, we really understand what we're talking about here. So if we come back to our design, this is exactly how we left it off. Let's go back into our workflow and see what we can do to make this better. Now, the first thing we want to look at is changing it from create a new form every time to looking to see if that user already has a form. So we just want to know if the user already has a form. If they do, we just want to change that existing form instead of creating a new one. However, if they don't have a form, then we want to create a new form. So how do we go about thinking about this? Well, this is when conditionals come in. So if you see we're on step 1, let me drag this over. You see only when down here. Now this is where we perform our conditionals. So if we have an only when conditional in here, it will only run this step 1 if it is true. So what do we want to look for here? Well, we only want to create the new form if a user doesn't have a form. So let's click our only when and see what options we have. Well, we know we're going to be looking for the current user, and we want to look to see if they have a form. So we have current user's form, and then we want to look for is empty, meaning they don't have a form in their record. Now that we have this conditional, this step 1 will only be run if this condition is met, and if it is not met, it will just skip to the next step. But there's a couple different ways to do this. Of course, in development, there always is. I don't actually want to do it at the step level. I want to do it at the workflow level because I don't want to have to add another condition for step 2 and then have to make 2 more steps that are of different condition. I'd rather separate those out into each of their own workflows. So let's do that. Let's get rid of this conditional we just made. Let's come up to the workflow itself or the event, and let's make the conditional there. That way, all of the steps underneath this workflow will run if the condition is met or is true. So we'll say only when the current user's form is empty do we run any of these steps. So say it's a fresh user, they have no form. What is going to happen is they will then create a form, we'll make a change to the user, and then we'll have the next step, which is going to be changing state variables, but more on that in just a second. We also need to do another workflow here. So we need to make another event. We'll click on the event, we'll come to general, or we'll come to elements, and we'll select an element is clicked. So we're going to choose the element, which is going to be that submit button. So we'll say button submit is clicked, but let's add the reverse condition here. So let's say the current user form is not empty, meaning they already have a form there. We just need to update the existing form. So instead of creating a new form and then making changes to a user, all we're doing is making changes to a form. So let's go to data things. Let's make changes to a thing. the thing we're going to change is do a search for. So we're going to look for something. So when we do a search for, we're going to look for a certain type, and we're going to look for a form. Now, when we're looking for a form, we want to add a constraint, though, and just look for one with the current user. So, of course, we can add a new constraint. We can either look by our user field, which we added for convenience, or the created by, meaning who created it, and it's going to be the same thing, the current user. Let's do created by. Let's say created by equals current user. That means we're only searching for the form created by a specific user. So we're searching for a form of a specific user, and then we're just going to select the first item of that form, and we're going to change a few things. So let's add our things to change. In fact, if we add all fields, it's just going to be these two, the name and the favorite food. The user, of course, is going to remain the same. So we're going to make changes to the favorite food and the name, and they're simply just going to be the values of those inputs again. So we'll have our input favorite food and then its value. We'll also have our input name and its value, and that is what we're going to change about this form. Now, we won't be making a new form in the database now. We're only going to be updating it if the user already has one available. So if one user submits multiple entries right now, it will just update the form and update the form. It won't add any new ones. Let's go test this out. Come back to your database. You see these 3 entries right here. Go ahead and delete those. Select all 3, come up and delete, because we want to start from scratch. So we'll click got it, and then we'll run as that test user that we made. So you see now we don't have a form. So great, we have a deleted thing. Let's run as, and then you'll refresh this page. Let's get out of step-by-step. I don't think we're in it, but we might be. Let's go to normal, and we'll enter our name. So Tucker Barbecue. Great. So let's hit submit, and let's see what happens. Great, we got Tucker and Barbecue. Now let's add test and Mexican. We'll hit submit, and notice it changed the values accordingly. But in our database, we only want to see test and Mexican. We don't want to see Tucker and Barbecue, because that means it made multiple forms. So if all is well in this world, we're just going to see test and Mexican. Let's go back to our database. Let's go to all forms. You can see we just see text and Mexican. So it means it worked correctly. We set it up right. We thought about the conditionals. We changed the workflows, and it works to how we want it. But we could still improve the user experience a bit more. Now let's say we only want the user to be able to submit one time. Right now we have the ability to submit multiple times, and it just changes what we store in the database for that form. But now we want to limit them to one submission. Now if they click submit, we need to show them that, hey, you've already submitted if they already have that form. Here's where state variable is going to come into play that's going to help our user understand this. Right now it says submit, but we want to change it to say submitted if they have already made a submission. Let's click on our submit button, and you can come up to the top right where it says this eye icon, and let's click that. Now you can see we have this element inspector and this custom state. So we can actually add a new custom state. Let's give this a state name. Now remember, this state name is essentially going to be a variable like X, and then we're just going to assign the value at a later time. So for our instance, this state name will be submitted, and then we'll just say it is a text state variable because it is. We'll go ahead and create that. The default value, this means what it is going to show initially before anything happens. We'll say it is just submit. So that is the default. It'll say submit. The variable name is submitted. So just remember that because we're going to use it in just a second. Great. So it will say submit, but we need to change the state variable value to something else when a form is submitted or when the user has made a submission. How do we do that? Let's come back to workflow. Now we have 2 options here. We have when there is no form, so when the current user's form is empty, and when there is a form. So current user's form is not empty. So we actually want to run it when the form is empty. Now, the reason being is if we ran it here, that means they've already submitted something. We need it to show right when they submit, not after the fact when they try to submit again. So let's come to current user's form is empty. They'll create a new form. They'll make changes to the user. And then we want to reflect a new state variable or change that state variable. How do we do that? Come down to element actions and we'll set state. So this is our option, element set state. The element we're going to be changing is our submit button, so button submit. The custom state we made, you'll now see appear here, which is submitted. So the value now needs to change. So this is not the value. Submitted is not our value. That is just the state variable's name. The value is going to be here. So we'll say submitted. Great. So now that we have that set up, it should say submitted when we preview. The last thing we need to do is make sure we're displaying the state variable and not that static submit text. So we have to come back to our design. Right now, it just says submit right here in this text box. This now needs to be dynamic, and it needs to be the value of our state variable, which can now change. Of course, it's going to default to submit, but when we submit a form, it should say submitted. We'll scroll down to our button, and now you can see that we have this custom state here, which is our submitted state. Let's do that. So we're displaying button A's submitted state variable. Now, this is, of course, going to change, starting as submit, changing to submitted. Let's go back to our database. Let's clear out our previous entry. So go ahead and delete that. We say got it, all users, and then we run as that test user. So let's see what happens. We'll enter our name, and then we'll enter our favorite food. Let's go ahead and make it normal, and go ahead and click submit. Now notice what just happened. Our data displayed correctly down here, and this button now changed to submitted. So if we click it again, what happens? Well, nothing happens. Now, if we change our information here to test and Mexican, click submit, it still changes though. So we need to stop it from submitting if there isn't already an entry. So let's go back to our workflow and do this. Come back to our editor, come back to our workflow, and right now, we just keep making changes to it, the form, but we really don't want to do this anymore. So let's get rid of this workflow. And that means that we only can submit one time. So if we were to get rid of this workflow, now we only have this as our option. So let's run as a new user again. We have all forms. Let's go ahead and clear out our data again. So delete, got it. And now let's run as the test user once again. We'll say Tucker, we'll say barbecue, we'll click submit, it changes to submitted. Let's change this to test, click again, and notice now nothing changed. Okay, great, but it doesn't tell the user anything. I keep clicking submitted and I should see something happened. In fact, every time a user does something, they should get feedback. So we need to display some sort of alert or pop-up that says, hey, you can only submit once, or you've already submitted. And again, how we're going to do this is using conditionals. So let me show you one more thing. Let's come to our design, and we want to display an alert right here if a user has already submitted something. So what can we do? We can come to our visual elements, and you'll see this alert option. Let's drag this on the screen and see how to use this. Drag it on. Let's change its layout a bit to center it in the middle of the page, right below that submit button, and let's say something like, you have already submitted a form. So that lets them know they've already submitted and they can probably only submit one form. Now we need this to display only if they've already made a submission. So how are we going to go about doing this? Well, we need to make a new event with a new condition. Because if we look at this button, this will only run when the form is empty. But we need to show the alert when the form is not empty, so it can't be in a step here because this won't run. So we need another event, and this event needs to be the opposite. So when an element is clicked, or when that button is clicked in this case, so button A, and the form is not empty. So current user form is not empty, meaning they've already made a submission. Do we want to then show the alert message? So we come down here, we come to element actions. You can now see this alert option where we can show a message. And then that's all. We don't have to add another condition here because we added it up here. Now by default, alerts are hidden. They only show if you have a show message step in one of your workflows, and if there's a condition attached, that it is met or yields true. So let's go see this in action. Let's come back to our database first. Let's clear out our form entry. Go ahead and delete that. Let's run as our user. So run as, to clear this. And let's start from scratch. So this is a user who just came on our site, filling out a form, who has never submitted a form before. Come and enter our name, our favorite food. We'll click submit. It'll now say submitted and barbecue and Tucker. And if we try to do another submission and click submitted, you now see a pop-up that says you have already submitted a form. If we keep clicking it, it keeps showing up, letting the user know and giving them that feedback that they need. It's super important that you make UX top priority because you don't want a user going on your application getting frustrated when they're clicking on stuff and not seeing anything happen because they don't know how your app works. They don't know what's going on in the back end. All they can see is the UI front end and messages that get displayed when they perform an action. Never have an action on your application where nothing happens, where a user clicks a button and there's nothing. Even if they can't use that function, you need to have a message pop up that says why it's not working. Hopefully that was helpful. I know it might be a lot to cover in one lesson, but watch this back a few times. Make sure you get it and practice it on your own, even with different use cases. That way it really is ingrained in your memory and you understand it fully. Hopefully that was helpful. If you have any questions, reach out in the community. Let's head over to the next lesson.